Former Cabinet Minister, former Transport Secretary Louise Haigh. These interviews are normally personal. We're going to do a bit of that, but actually they're really going to be about politics, the questions today, because you said some words after the local elections which were, wow, damning about the government. Your words: voters are desperate for change and they have sensed from us that we are not capable or interested in delivering it. I mean, that's a serious allegation. Not capable or interested in delivering change.
Look, these results last Thursday were horrendous for the Labour government and existential for the Tories. And I was very concerned to see the results in and of themselves, but I was also very concerned, as I've already written, by the government's response, which said we'll go further and faster on the current course. And I think what we heard from voters on Thursday was that they're not happy with the current course, that they voted for change, and not only are they not feeling it yet, but they don't really believe that we will deliver it. And that's why I talked about the need to pick battles and to fight fights, because people just don't feel that we're fighting on their side. And whenever there's an issue of the day, they either don't know which side we're going to pick, or they pick the side that they're not on. And in politics, conflict really clarifies what side you're on. So I think, for example, we should be taking on the tax avoiders, and we should be making a real massive virtue of that. We should be not cozying up to big tech, but taking it on so that we have proper online safety rules in this country and that we tax them and they pay their taxes here. I don't think that we are doing enough of that, and we're pretending to be on everyone's side at the same time, and that just ends up meaning that we're on no one's side.
Margaret Thatcher, she used to like picking battles. That's why some people didn't like her. You and I probably included. Why was she right to do so? Yeah, why was that good politics?
Margaret Thatcher is a perfect example of that, because she drew her strength from that conflict and from defining her enemies, whether it be the National Union of the Mine Workers or the Soviet Union. Obviously, I would completely disagree with the battle that she took with the NUM, but that meant that people knew exactly who she was and what she was for. And not everything in politics is about conflict. Nobody wants to see everyone rowing all the time. Yeah. But I do think drawing those dividing lines and showing that, taking on bad bosses that don't pay the minimum wage, taking on bad bosses that aren't delivering the employment rights that we are expanding at the moment, that will define why we're doing the things that we're doing, and it will make people hear them that much clearer.
The government would say they're doing all of those things.
The government are doing them, but people aren't hearing, and that's the point. So we are doing really good things that the public would welcome. Expansion of employment rights. Banning fire and rehire is just almost as popular with Reform voters as it is with Labour ones, but they're just not hearing it at the moment because we're not taking the fight to them. We're not taking the fight, I don't think, to reform on those issues, and we're not taking the fight to the villains in the piece, which is those businesses and employers that at the moment really exploit workers and undermine their security and their work and their lives.
Is this about communications or is this strategic? Because I think what you've just said is we are doing great stuff, but nobody knows about it. Voters don't get it. Isn't that just a comms problem?
No, I think it's a bit of both. So, as I said at the weekend, we are doing lots of great stuff. There's the Employment Rights Bill, which is a massive expansion of workers' rights. We know when we poll Reform voters, they're almost as strongly in favour of banning fire and rehire as Labour voters are. There's a significant rise in the minimum wage, which will help millions of workers across this country. And, of course, almost unprecedented investment in the NHS. But I just don't think people are hearing that because they don't really understand why we're doing these things or what the story of this government is, but also because some of the more unpopular decisions, obviously winter fuel allowance and the impending cuts to welfare, are drowning out those policies. So I think it's a bit of both. I think we don't have a coherent story that makes sense to people, but I think there's obviously a content problem because of those unpopular policies.
I am certain that the Labour leadership will be thinking, why would Louise Haigh do this? Why would she speak out? Why wouldn't she come and have a word privately? Because it damages the whole thing.
Look, I don't take any joy in speaking out like this. I've been a loyal foot soldier and a loyal MP for the Labour Party my entire time. But I genuinely believe that those results on Thursday need to be the canary down the mine for the Labour Party. And I was genuinely alarmed by their response. And that's why I felt I had the need to speak out, because I think unless we issue a course correction now, we are in danger of our own existential crisis over the coming months, years, and certainly in the next election. And that's why I felt I had the responsibility to speak out and echo what a lot of my Labour colleagues are feeling at the moment, but don't feel like they have the platform to be able to do that.
Now, Labour was elected on a manifesto promise not to increase income tax, VAT, or national insurance for the whole of this Parliament, that people wouldn't see tax increases in their pay packets. Do you think that Rachel Reeves can stick to those three promises?
Yeah, I agree with those tax promises. You know, we shouldn't be putting up taxes on working people. We shouldn't be putting up taxes that hinder growth, which is exactly what VAT would do. But I do think there are options available to us to taxing the massive wealth that does exist in assets in this country. And other countries have done it, like Spain and France and Norway, and raised significant amounts of revenue. This country is an incredibly unequal one. And we have a tiny percent, 1% of the top income earners or top wealth owners in this country own 70% of the wealth in this country. That cannot be right. So we need to be able to raise money from them rather than from the pockets of working people, or rather than measures that hinder growth. And I think unless we do that, we're going to see the Labour government and the Chancellor being forced to make these decisions, like winter fuel allowance, like welfare cuts, on a very regular basis, because they're not able to balance the books otherwise.
Do you have any sense of how it might work? A wealth tax is what you're talking about. I mean, do you come for people with big houses? I don't know. Or do you go through people's bank account? What's rich?
Well, the one of the main proposals that is on the table is a 1 to 2% tax on assets over £10 million.
Right.
So we're not talking about anybody ordinary.
So if you are, so the people in your sides and the people that you believe need to pay a bit more at this time, you're talking about people with assets of more than £10 million.
Yes, exactly.
There can't be that many people with assets more than 10 million quid.
Well,
they raise much?
Well, no, the proposal that's on the table reckons that could raise £22 to £25 billion a year. So it would be by far and away the biggest revenue raiser that has been proposed through the last budget, or that could be in the sites of the Comprehensive Spending Review. But you could do things like equalise capital gains tax with income tax. You could do a land tax. The point is that wealth is disproportionately hoarded in this country by people who own land and estate, and it's been inherited through generations and generations. And unless we tax that, then working people are going to bear more and more of the burden.
OK. Just sort of final point on those local elections. What does Nigel Farage have that Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch don't? Because he had a stonking night, didn't he?
He did, and I don't think we do ourselves any favours by denying that. Look, he has the benefit of never having been in government and never having to be responsible for any of the choices he makes. He can say what he likes and not bear any of the consequences. But he's also tapping into a deep sense of frustration in the country and a real sense that the system isn't working for a lot of people. And I think it's possible for a government to encapsulate that as well, even whilst they're delivering. And that's why I say we need to really pick those battles and pick those choices in order to demonstrate that day in, day out, we're on the side of working ordinary people in this country. Because just relying on delivery isn't going to be enough to connect with those voters.
OK. Now, you resigned from the government last year because details emerged of an incident. You were in your 20s. It's more than a decade ago when you reported a work phone was stolen after a mugging, actually. Mm-hmm. That phone later turned up. You pleaded guilty to fraud at the time. You lose your cabinet job when these details emerge. Looking back on why you had to resign, is there anything you felt you should have done differently?
Oh, well, I mean, obviously it was a really, really stupid mistake in the first place. Yeah, I've been mugged on a night out in London, and in the aftermath, I wrongly, but in genuine mistake, confusedly said that the work phone had been stolen. That was then replaced by my work. And a little while later, I found the original phone. It was a deactivated old BlackBerry. And I genuinely sort of looked at it and didn't think to do anything about it. And that was why I ended up pleading guilty when the police investigated it, because I had done the offence that they accused me of, but I never gained anything from it, you know. I didn't sell the phone. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was always a huge source of frustration, you know, and you know, it was traumatising to be mugged in the first place. It was traumatising to be prosecuted in that way, and then it was a whole other trauma for that to dominate the news last year, and it was, you know, a total humiliation. So there's not a day gone by since that happened that I don't regret the mistake I made. But I hope your viewers would accept that I've very much paid the price for that mistake.
Now, losing a cabinet job. You've talked about you've felt humiliation. It's a big deal. You're the youngest ever woman to be appointed to the cabinet. Yeah. And the first out of this new Labour government. It's hard.
Yeah.
What emotion would you use? Is it anger, depression, regret, all of the above?
Yeah, I think I went through all those stages. It was a period of grief, and I wouldn't wish what I went through on my worst enemy. You know, politics is a rough old business, but until it happens to you, until you're the target of it, you can't really ever appreciate it. So it was a rough few months, but I can honestly say I'm through the other side, and
You are.
I am, and I'm delighted actually, and I can say for the first time, not through gritted teeth, that I'm happy to serve on the backbenches.
Okay, well, that's good. Now, the Prime Minister said at the time, he had to let you go from the cabinet because new details had emerged in the case of that stolen phone, which then turned up. How did you feel when he said that? What did you conceal from him? That's the implication, that you didn't tell him the whole story.
Yeah, I don't know. Nobody's ever put what these additional information was. I disclosed the whole incident to Keir in opposition. He subsequently promoted me in the shadow cabinet and then to cabinet, and I'm absolutely certain that I disclosed the whole incident. All the information is out there. The court records have been published by newspapers. The issue is, as I describe it, and there is absolutely nothing more to it.
So, as far as you were concerned, you told him absolutely everything?
100%.
God, how did you feel when he said you didn't? Even though you did.
Yeah, you know, there were lots of things that were very difficult for me in that period, and yeah, that was certainly one of them. But I know, and I know there are people, you know, most people watching, and I know there are people around that know that the whole thing was disclosed.
Now, talk of a pre-summer reshuffle. I mean, lots of your former cabinet colleagues are being, repeatedly actually, suggested that they'll be moved on. Of course, the public are entitled to criticise cabinet ministers, politicians, but this feels like an inside job on some particular politicians, mainly women. I think the women are bearing the brunt of it. Who's doing it? Why is it happening?
Well, this I've said a couple of times now. You know, it is getting extremely frustrating to open the papers and read these briefings against largely my female cabinet ministers, for my female former cabinet members, colleagues, and it matters because it's really important that there is diversity of thought and experience around the cabinet table. And that doesn't just mean gender. Of course it doesn't. It means diversity of background and class background as well. And it's so disappointing to see really talented women cabinet members being briefed against in this way. But to be honest, at this stage in a government, we're 10 months in, nobody should be being briefed against. Everyone should have their shoulder to the wheel, making sure that we're all pulling in the same direction and that we are delivering for the people of this country. So I'm just really disappointed about it. But I do think there is a particular problem with the briefing against women in the cabinet.
Northern women. Northern
women in particular, yeah. It feels that way, doesn't it?
Do you think there's... the logic of that is like, do you think that the party's got a problem with women, with northern women?
There's not a problem in the party by any stretch of the imagination, but there's clearly, whoever is briefing journalists has a specific problem with northern outspoken women.
Now, you are back on the backbenches. You say that you're sincerely, you can say that you're happy to be there.
And I've got no poker face, so you know I am being sincere.
And you're in campaigning mode, and you've got non-disclosure agreements in your sites.
Yes.
Just explain what a non-disclosure agreement is.
Yeah, people will have heard about NDAs in the context of, the entertainment industry and maybe watching TV dramas and crime dramas. It's when, normally when a settlement is made out of court, people sign a non-disclosure agreement in order to ensure that it doesn't go any further, they don't push it any further to court, or that they don't badmouth the employer elsewhere. Or it can be signed when you start work somewhere. And that's perfectly legitimate when it's to protect trade secrets or to protect things that you might see go on, legitimate things that they don't want their competitors knowing about. But where they are increasingly being abused is when people have been perhaps sexually harassed or assaulted in the workplace or discriminated against. And in order to get compensation for that, their employer will say, right, you're not allowed to speak about that at all to anybody. And I've seen cases where women have been raped at work, and their NDAs have specified that they are not allowed to speak to medical professionals about their experience.
You've seen that?
I've seen that.
Because as part of your campaign,
exactly.
People who have been lawyers have shown you...
I've been absolutely inundated with people's stories about the horrific things, but it will specify that they're not allowed to speak to their best friends or their families about it, and it means they can never get over that trauma. So it's a terrible experience for the person involved, but it also means that these organisations can cover up, in some instances, horrific practices, and also and never address those issues that are going on and never affect any change. So that's why I'm campaigning with some brilliant organisations, including Zelda Perkins, who was Harvey Weinstein's production assistant, and she broke her NDA in order to expose the horrific wrongdoing that he was perpetuating. But we want to ban NDAs in specific cases of harassment and discrimination. And other countries have done this. Ireland has already done it. 27 states in the United States have already done it. And it's high time that this country followed suit.
Why is this the first issue It's a very noble issue, but how did you get here?
I mean, there's other issues that I've been sort of bubbling under the surface, but I've always worked with victims of domestic abuse and sexual harassment, and I've always felt it was a responsibility to stand up and talk about those issues that are often brushed under the carpet. This campaign was brought to me by Zelda and actually a Lib Dem MP who I get on very well with, Layla Moran, and it just felt like a good one to re-emerge with.
Just since you mention things that are brushed under the carpet, many people feel that actually the grooming gangs that have operated, continue to operate in this country, child sexual exploitation, they're very angry with the government about... I mean, people want a national inquiry. I know there was one which related to Rotherham. None of the recommendations were implemented by the last government. I know all those arguments, but I just think, gosh, the politics of this isn't right. Whenever I hear a minister sort of say, no, we're going to have local ones if local councils want it, and I just think this is a mess. You couldn't explain it on a doorstep. What do you think? Can you explain it on a doorstep?
Look, everyone is concerned about the scale of child sexual exploitation in our communities. And we get these particular examples cropping up all the time, like Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, and they just bring to the surface how widespread the issue is in every single community across the country. And I guess the frustration in the country is nothing has changed. Nothing seems to have changed since Rotherham shocked the nation over a decade ago. And that's a perfect example of where people need to see a government gripping the bull by its horns and saying, we are not going to stand for this anymore and we want to see real action. So that would be perfectly crystallised in a new inquiry. But I also understand the government saying a new inquiry, Professor Jay's inquiry took 7 years. We don't want to be kicking that down the camp for another 7 years. We're going to implement these 17 recommendations now. But again, it's that technocratic, managerial language that I think doesn't connect And we need some communicators that are going to go out there and say, no, this is unacceptable and this is the practical action that we are taking right now, and this is why we're standing on behalf of working class women that have been victimised in their communities. And I just feel sometimes that passion and that fight is a little bit lacking.
Politics is brutal. You've been subject to it. You've been a winner in politics. I'm sure you will be a winner again. You've been, you've suffered dark days in politics. It is brutal. Is it worth it?
It certainly has a way of knocking your ambition out of you every once in a while.
Well, some people will say, she's only speaking up because she wants to be a future leader. She's speaking up because she's trying to be the voice of the left.
Oh, well, let's knock that one on the head right away. That ambition has never surfaced in me at all. Look, I can't deny that I very seriously considered leaving politics back in December. And wanted to go away and never be seen again. But I have lots of brilliant friends and people who love me around me who kind of carried me through that. And then I've been able to give my head a shake and come back fighting. And as I say, I'm delighted to be back serving on the backbenches.
Well, then, final question. Where next for the NDA campaign? Is the government going to help you and get it into law? I
really hope so, through the Employment Rights Bill. And today we've got Rebecca Ferguson, who's spoken out really bravely about her own experience. Yes, that's right, from the X Factor. Obviously, it's prevalent in the entertainment industry, but it's also really prevalent in low-income sectors like retail and hospitality.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like low-income.
Because you always read about it.
You read about the high-profile cases,
jobs.
exactly.
Right.
No,
okay.
it's very, very prolific in those industries. And obviously, those are the women that have the least opportunity to speak out. So it's them that we're fighting for now.
Louise Haigh, thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Good luck with the campaign.
Thank you.